This is Still in the Clear, the podcast that distills the art and science of home distilling into easy-to-follow, audible nuggets for the beginning moonshiner. This information is for education and entertainment purposes only. You could even call it fiction if you want to. Home distilling may be illegal in your area. I'm your host, Cyrus, and I'm just a guy that lives in the woods and likes to make shine. So let's get into it. So I wanted to take a minute to say thanks to everyone who has been supporting the show, whether you've purchased some of the merchandise like the totally awesome vintage Still in the Clear cap, or whether you've been getting your distilling supplies using stillintheclear.com's Amazon links, which Amazon pays us a little fraction as a commission, and it doesn't cost you any more to do that. Or whether you've been sharing our podcast with your friends and family and people you know that might find it interesting, or sharing it on your Facebook groups, pages, or anywhere, social media. We are really starting to grow now, and I appreciate all the support from you folks. So a sincere thanks, and let's get to the show. Well, I know I've been gone a while, and this episode is long overdue. I know, because I've been getting emails and comments asking when this episode was coming out, and I apologize it has taken me so long to get this one out. Some of it is because I've been lazy, but most of it was because I wanted to make sure I had everything right and I had all the pieces in place. The reason for that is I wanted to have this episode out at the same time I wanted to release the YouTube video of me demonstrating this recipe. And I also wanted to have a recipe kit available on stillintheclear.com, and that is what really took most of the time, getting all those pieces put in place. But the easy all-grain beginner recipe is ready. This recipe is designed to be a transition recipe for the beginner to move easily from the sugar wash mash to the all-grain mash. And it's a pretty big step to go from a sugar mash recipe to an all-grain recipe, because unlike the sugar mash, where there are really just a couple of variables to get right to be successful, the all-grain mash can have multiple points of failure depending on the complexity of the recipe. And there are hundreds of all-grain mash recipes out there, and some of them are pretty easy, and some of them are not so easy. But I wanted a recipe that is very simple to start with. It's a good base, but that can also be used as a building block. And this recipe in its simplest form is the easiest all-grain recipe I know of that can also be built upon to become more complex over time. So with this recipe, we will be able to add new distilling skills one step at a time in incremental complexities, making learning the nuances of home distilling easy for the beginner. And that's what we're all about here at Still in the Clear, trying to make things as easy as possible for those who are beginning. So here's the recipe. It's 2.5 pounds of 2-row barley, 7.5 pounds of flaked corn. That's it. Really simple. The only downside to this recipe is that the flaked maize is somewhat expensive, but it's also the reason we can eliminate the gelatinization step, which eliminates the highest target temperature point and a hold time. So it also shaves off about an hour to an hour and a half of the process. So we're looking at a trade-off with this recipe that is, we get a really simple recipe for a little extra cost. Okay, so let's start talking about the brewing. With this first run at this recipe, you're going to use 6 gallons of water. And in later iterations of this recipe, we can use less water or more grains to get a higher specific gravity, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to use 6 gallons of water, and we'll start by putting that in a kettle that is at least a 10-gallon capacity. And if you want to go watch my YouTube video of me mashing in this recipe, you'll see that I'm just using my 11-gallon stainless steel turkey fryer. And I'll put a link to that video down in the show notes. You're going to bring that water up to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason is this temperature is high enough that the flaked corn will hydrolyze easily, but it's low enough that the process of adding in the grains and stirring them up will lower the temperature almost to the next target temperature, which is 153 degrees. So by the time you're done adding in the grains and stirring them up, you're almost to your next target temperature. Now you're going to put your brew bag into the kettle. I'll put a link down in the show notes for a brew bag. If you don't know what a brew bag is, they're really cheap, they're reusable, and they save you some hassle. So the brew bag keeps the grains actually separate from the water. So when it's time to separate the grain and the water, it's not that hard to do. So you're going to put the bag in the kettle and you're going to stir in your flaked corn. This will hydrolyze the flaked corn and give you time to stir it in real good, making sure there aren't any clumps sticking together. You don't want to dump all 7.5 pounds in at once. That would make it more difficult to be sure there are no clumps. The Easy All Grain Beginner's Ingredients Kit that we offer on STC comes with 2 bags of flaked corn. And my recommendation is, if you're using that kit, to pour half of a bag in at a time. Stir it up, pour the other half in, stir it up until you've put both bags, or 7.5 pounds of the flaked corn in, and stirred it all up. Then, once you've got this done, you're going to let the temperature drop to 153 degrees. And this is when you'll stir in the 2-row barley. And once you've stirred in the 2-row barley, you'll hold that temperature for 90 minutes. Now, it's important to note here that to hold this temperature, you may have to turn up the heat a couple of times to maintain it. This is where the brew bag is going to come in handy, because all you have to do to make sure you don't scorch the grains is to keep the brew bag off the bottom of the kettle. You can use spring clamps and kind of pin the brew bag to the rim of your kettle as it's held up off of the bottom. That way you know it doesn't sink back down to the bottom. And this makes it much easier because you're not having to sit there and stir the grains for 90 minutes to make sure it doesn't scorch. 90 minutes should be plenty of time for the enzymes in the barley to convert the starch in the corn to fermentable sugars. After the 90 minutes are up, the mash process should be complete. You'll check the starch conversion by dipping a spoon into the mash to get some of the mashed liquid, and put a couple of drops of just regular old iodine in the spoon. And the iodine is a really dark brown color. And if that color in the iodine, as you kind of swirl the liquid in the spoon just to kind of mix it up a little bit, if the iodine clears up, then the starch conversion was successful. And if it stays a dark color or a really dark gray color, then there's still starch that needs to be converted. And you can just hold the 153 degree temperature for another 30 minutes or so and do another test. Now, if you keep doing this and you're not getting a starch conversion, then something has gone wrong and you don't have to worry about it. Don't keep doing it. It may never happen. So at that point, you can just add some sugar if you want to keep, you don't want to waste all the work you've already done. And if you're unsuccessful in converting the starch into sugar, just add some sugar and continue on with the fermentation step. Now, it's time to separate the grains from the wash. With the brew bag, this is easy. It's just you slowly lift the bag and let the liquid kind of drain off the grain. And this takes a little bit, 5 or 10 minutes. And you can twist that bag up, kind of spin it, and it'll tighten the bag up, which will get more of the liquid out, and kind of squeeze it. If it's not too hot, you can kind of squeeze it with your hands. And there are a number of ways to get more liquid off of the grain, but for now, we're just going to kind of do it by hand, and we're going to transfer our wash, which is, our mash minus the grains, into the fermenter, whatever fermenters we're going to use, and let the temperature drop to 90 degrees Fahrenheit so you can pitch your yeast. And before you pitch your yeast, take a sample of the wash so that you can get a specific gravity reading. And, you're not going to be able to get the reading right away because it's going to be too hot. You're going to have to let that sample cool down to 60 degrees for your hydrometer to give you an accurate reading. So you're going to be able to use this reading to get your potential ABV or alcohol by volume, and to calculate actual ABV later if you don't ferment all the way dry. This will also give you a base point to know if your ferment is working or if it isn't. So that's why I'm always telling people that the triple scale hydrometer is a tool you should get. Because that's what it's used for, getting that specific gravity. And that's it. Easy peasy. Now you just let the yeast do its thing like a regular sugar wash. And if you want to see this process in action, head over to the Still in the Clear Community YouTube channel, where I made a video of this process with this specific recipe with the actual kit that we offer on stillintheclear.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can check it out. Now you should really get out there and try this recipe. Learning the ins and outs of the all-grain recipe will just open up a whole new world of home distilling if all you've done to this point is a sugar mash or a sugar wash, which they're a lot of fun too, and you can make some great whiskey liquor from those recipes. But the all-grain, there's a lot more in the all-grain world that you can play with. So get out there and give it a shot. I don't think you'll be disappointed. If you haven't done a sugar wash or a sugar mash recipe like the UJSSM or the super simple beginner recipe from Still in the Clear, you need to do those first. Don't jump right in with an all grain recipe. Start with the sugar washes, get your feet wet there first. And that's about it for this episode. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'm glad to be back doing episodes. So you can expect new episodes from me now about every week. And I appreciate you, and we'll talk at you later. Well, that wraps up this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Share this episode with people you think might enjoy it. That would be much appreciated. It'll sure help our show grow. And don't forget, doing is improving. Have a good one. Talk to y'all next week.